They say revenge is a dish best served cold. I say it's best served with patience, precision, and a touch of irony that burns hotter than any flame. My name is Samuel Thorne, and at 73 years old, I learned that wisdom isn't just about knowing when to fight, it's about knowing how to win without throwing a single punch. Let me tell you about Margaret Ashford, my neighbor, and the woman who made the gravest mistake of underestimating an old man with nothing but time and a sharp mind. The morning it all began was unremarkable. September air carried the scent of ripening apples from my orchard, and I was sitting on my porch, the same porch my grandfather built in 1947, watching the sunrise paint the valley gold. 50 acres of honest land, every inch of it earned through decades of sweat and careful stewardship. My wife Martha and I had raised our children here, buried our dreams in this soil, and watched them bloom into something beautiful. Then the police cars arrived. 3 of them, lights flashing like some grotesque carnival. I watched them roll up my gravel drive, dust trailing behind them like a bad omen. I didn't move from my rocking chair. At my age, sudden movements are both undignified and unnecessary. Sheriff Bradley Pike stepped out first, a man whose stomach arrived several seconds before the rest of him. I'd known Bradley since he was a boy stealing apples from the very orchard he was now trespassing upon. "Samuel," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Coward. I'm afraid we need to talk about a serious matter." I took a sip of my coffee. "Still hot. Good. Then talk, Bradley. Though I suspect this isn't a social call." He shifted his weight, and I heard his leather belt creak in protest. "We've received a complaint. About your property line. Seems there's evidence suggesting that the eastern 5 acres of your land, the section bordering the Ashford property, was never legally yours." The coffee suddenly tasted bitter. "Margaret Ashford filed the complaint, I presume?" I kept my voice level, but my mind was already racing, already connecting the dots I'd been too trusting to see before. Bradley nodded, finally looking at me. There was shame in his eyes, but not enough to stop him from doing what he came to do. "She's provided documentation. Old surveys. Claims that your deed is fraudulent. The district attorney's office has reviewed the case, and..." He pulled out a folded paper from his jacket. "This is a warrant for your arrest, Samuel. For fraud and illegal occupation of land." I won't lie to you, my hands shook as I set down that coffee cup. Not from fear, mind you, but from rage. Pure, white-hot rage that I had to force down into my gut like swallowing hot coals. You see, I knew exactly what this was about. 3 months earlier, Margaret Ashford had approached me with an offer. She wanted to buy my eastern 5 acres, the prime section that bordered her property and included the only natural spring for 3 miles. Water rights in our county are worth more than gold, and that spring had been the reason my grandfather chose this land in the first place. I'd refused politely. That land had been in my family for 3 generations. Margaret had smiled, that venomous smile of hers, and said something I should have paid more attention to: "It's a shame when people cling to things that aren't rightfully theirs." Now, standing in handcuffs on my own porch while my neighbors craned their necks to watch, I understood. Margaret Ashford hadn't just wanted my land. She wanted to humiliate me, to destroy me, to take what was mine through the very system meant to protect it. They took me to county jail. 73 years old, and I spent my first night behind bars, sleeping on a cot that smelled of disinfectant and desperation. The bail was set at $50,000, deliberately high. Margaret wanted me to suffer, to lose everything trying to fight her. But here's what she didn't know: I might have been old, but I wasn't broken. And I had spent 50 years not just working my land, but learning, reading, preparing for challenges I hoped would never come. My wife Martha used to joke that I was the only farmer in 3 counties with a law degree gathering dust in a drawer. I'd earned that degree through night school and correspondence courses over 15 years, never practiced a day, but never forgot a single lesson. My son Marcus posted bail the next morning, selling his truck to do it. When he picked me up, his face was tight with worry and anger. "Dad, what the hell is happening? Your land has been in our family since." "I know, son." I placed a weathered hand on his shoulder. "And it's going to stay that way. But I need you to trust me and do exactly what I say." First stop, the county clerk's office. I'd known Edna Martinez for 40 years, she'd been recording deeds since before computers existed, and her memory was sharper than any database. "Samuel," she whispered when I walked in, glancing around nervously. "I heard what happened. I'm so sorry, but the documents Margaret provided. Were they originals, Edna?" She blinked. "Well, no. They were certified copies, but the certification looked legitimate." "From which authority?" "The state archives in the capital." "Samuel, what are you thinking?" I leaned closer. "I'm thinking that Margaret Ashford is very clever, but not quite clever enough. I need you to pull every document related to my property going back to the original land grant. Every survey, every transfer, every notation. And I need you to do it quietly." Understanding dawned in her eyes. "How quiet are we talking?" "Whisper quiet, Edna. Can you do that for an old friend?" She nodded. "Come back after closing. Bring coffee. We're going to be here a while." My second stop was less pleasant, the law office of Thomas Reeves, the slickest attorney in the county. His office smelled of leather and expensive cologne, and his smile was practiced enough to seem genuine. "Mr. Thorne, I've been expecting you. Your case is quite the talk of town. I assume you're here to discuss representation." "I'm here to discuss Margaret Ashford," I said, sitting without invitation. "How much did she pay you?" The smile faltered. "I don't know what you—" "Please, Thomas. I may be old, but I'm not senile. Margaret approached you about purchasing my land 3 months ago. When I refused to sell, she needed a legal strategy. You provided it." I pulled out a small notebook I'd been keeping. "On August 15th, you had lunch with Margaret at the Riverside Inn. On August 22nd, you visited the state archives, unusual for a small-town attorney handling routine cases. On September 3rd, you had a 90-minute meeting with District Attorney Carson." The color drained from his face. "How did you—" "I'm a farmer, Thomas. We're natural observers. And when someone threatens what's mine, I become very observant indeed." I leaned forward. "Now, you can either tell me exactly what Margaret's planning, or I can take what I know to the State Bar Association and let them sort out your role in fraudulent legal proceedings." He was quiet for a long moment, weighing his options. Finally, "She can't touch you legally. Your deed is solid. But she found something, a technicality in the original land survey from 1947. A 2-degree error in the boundary line that, if interpreted a certain way, would shift the eastern boundary 5 acres onto her property. And the documents she provided? Altered. Not forgeries, she's too smart for that. But carefully edited certified copies that emphasize the survey error while omitting the corrective documents filed in 1952. He ran a hand through his hair. She's paid off Pike and Carson. The plan is to drag you through a legal battle that bankrupts you, forces you to sell the rest of your land to pay legal fees. She'll drop the charges eventually, but by then, you'll have nothing left. How much is she paying you? $50,000. Plus another 50 when the charges stick and you're forced to sell. I stood slowly, my joints protesting. Thomas, I'm going to give you a chance to be on the right side of this. Because what Margaret doesn't know, what neither of you know, is that this isn't just about land. This is about legacy, about justice, and about teaching a valuable lesson about hubris. What do you want from me? Information. Every document she gave you, every communication. Everything. I pulled out an envelope from my jacket. This contains copies of your meetings with Margaret, photographs of your visits to the archives, and a detailed timeline. If I go down, I'm taking you with me. But if you help me, I'll make sure your name stays clean. He stared at the envelope like it was a snake. This is blackmail. No, son. This is justice. Blackmail would be if I wasn't giving you a choice. That night, Edna and I sat in the empty clerk's office, surrounded by decades of records. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, and the coffee had long gone cold, but we were getting somewhere. Look at this, Edna said, holding up a yellowed document. The original 1947 survey. See this notation here? The surveyor notes a correction required due to magnetic declination error. And here, she pulled out another document, the 1952 corrective survey that fixed the boundary line exactly where your fence sits today. Margaret's copies wouldn't have shown the 1952 correction. No, because it was filed in a different record series. She probably didn't even know to look for it. Edna smiled grimly. Samuel, your property line is exactly where it should be. You have absolute legal right to every inch. But that's not enough, is it? Because she has Pike and Carson in her pocket. They'll bury this evidence, delay proceedings, make it disappear. Edna nodded slowly. So what do we do? I pulled out my phone. Yes, this old man has learned to use technology, and began taking photographs of every document. We build our case in absolute secret. We let Margaret think she's winning. And we wait for her to make the one mistake that arrogant people always make. What's that? They overreach. Over the next 3 weeks, I played the part of the defeated old man perfectly. I shuffled around town, looking worried and frail. I sold my tractor, publicly, claiming I needed money for legal fees. I even let slip at the diner that I was considering selling the land to make this whole mess go away. Margaret took the bait beautifully. She began visiting me, offering to help by purchasing the entire property at a fair price, roughly 1/3 of its actual value. Each visit, she'd smile that serpent smile and talk about how unfortunate it was that legal matters were so complicated. You know, Samuel, she said during her 3rd visit, sitting on my porch like she already owned it, at your age, wouldn't it be easier to just settle somewhere smaller? Let someone younger handle this land. I gave her my best defeated old man look. Maybe you're right, Margaret. I'm tired. So very tired. Her eyes gleamed. I could have papers drawn up by tomorrow. Cash payment, quick settlement. You could be free of all this. Let me think about it, I said, my voice quavering just right. Can you give me until the hearing next week? She agreed, practically floating off my porch in triumph. What Margaret didn't know was that every conversation had been recorded. My grandson Timothy, studying computer science at the State University, had helped me install tiny microphones around my porch, in my living room, anywhere Margaret might talk. And she'd talked plenty, eventually dropping her guard enough to mention how she'd handled Pike and Carson, how she'd made sure the right documents surfaced, in the DA's office. But I needed more. I needed her to confess to the fraud itself, on record, in a way that couldn't be dismissed. So I set the trap. I called Margaret 3 days before the hearing and asked her to come by one more time. When she arrived, I was sitting on my porch, looking friendlier than ever, a stack of papers in my lap. Margaret, I said weakly, I've made a decision. I'm going to sell. But I need to know something first, and I need you to be honest with me. She sat down, barely containing her excitement. Of course, Samuel. What is it? Those documents you found, the ones showing the survey error. Where exactly did you get them? She hesitated, but pride won out over caution. It always does. I hired a research firm. They found the original surveys in the state archives. And the 1952 corrective survey? The one that fixed the boundary line. Her smile faltered for just a moment. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. I pulled out a copy of the corrective survey from my stack of papers. This document, filed in April 1952, corrects the exact error you've been using to claim my land. Your research firm found it, didn't they? And you buried it. Her face hardened. You can't prove that. Can't I? I pulled out my phone and played a recording, Thomas Reeves explaining exactly how Margaret had edited the documents. Your own attorney seems to think I can. The color drained from her face. You're bluffing. Thomas would never. Thomas was more loyal to his law license than to your money. I stood, and suddenly I wasn't a frail old man anymore. My back was straight, my voice was strong. You made a mistake, Margaret. You assumed that because I'm old, I'm stupid. You assumed that because I'm a farmer, I don't understand the law. And you assumed that you could bribe your way through small-town officials without consequences. You have nothing, she hissed. Pike and Carson will bury anything you bring to court. Will they? I smiled. See, that's your second mistake. You assumed I'd fight this in county court, under your bought judges. But this isn't just about a land dispute anymore, Margaret. The moment you bribed law enforcement officials and fabricated evidence, you committed federal crimes. And federal investigators are very interested in public corruption cases. Her face went white. You're lying. Am I? I pulled out another envelope. This is a letter from the FBI field office in the Capitol. They've been investigating corruption in our county for 6 months, seems we're not the only ones who've noticed Pike's sudden expensive tastes. Your bribery, your document fraud, your conspiracy with Thomas Reeves, it's all been documented. And as of tomorrow morning, warrants will be issued. I watched her process this, watched the calculation in her eyes as she tried to find a way out. And then I watched her make the final, fatal mistake. How much, she asked. How much do you want to make this go away? I pressed a button on my phone, stopping the recording. And there it is. Attempted bribery of a witness in a federal investigation. Thank you, Margaret. That was the last piece I needed. The federal agents arrived 20 minutes later. They'd been parked down the road, waiting for my signal. Margaret tried to run, actually tried to make it to her car, but at 65, she wasn't any faster than I was. The hearing the following week was nothing like what Margaret had planned. Instead of a quiet county court proceeding where she controlled the narrative, it became a federal case in district court. Thomas Reeves had turned state's evidence, providing every document, every recording, every detail of Margaret's scheme in exchange for immunity. Sheriff Pike and District Attorney Carson were arrested on corruption charges. The evidence was overwhelming, not just from my case, but from a dozen other instances where they'd taken bribes to manipulate cases. Pike's expensive new boat and Carson's sudden real estate investments were particularly hard to explain on their government salaries. Margaret Ashford was charged with fraud, bribery, conspiracy, and a half-dozen other federal crimes. Her trial lasted 3 weeks, and I attended every day, sitting in the gallery, watching her empire crumble. The irony wasn't lost on anyone in that courtroom. She'd wanted my 5 acres with the natural spring, but her greed cost her everything. Her own property, 1,200 acres of prime land, was seized to pay legal fees and restitution. The spring she'd coveted so desperately ended up being sold at auction. I bought it for a fair price. My family gathered on my porch the evening after the trial concluded. My son Marcus, my daughter Jennifer who'd flown in from Seattle, my grandchildren who'd helped me document everything. We sat watching the sunset, the same view my grandfather had watched, the same land he'd tilled. Dad, Marcus said quietly, how did you know it would work? How did you know you could take her down? I sipped my coffee, hot and perfect this time. I didn't know, son. Not for certain. But I knew a few things that gave me an advantage. Like what? Like patience. Margaret wanted revenge quickly, wanted to see me suffer immediately. But revenge isn't about speed, it's about thoroughness. I took my time, built my case brick by brick. What else? Jennifer asked. I knew the law. Not just the basics, but the details. The technicalities. The difference between county and federal jurisdiction. Margaret knew enough law to be dangerous, but not enough to be careful. And the recordings? Timothy, my tech-savvy grandson, grinned. Pretty clever for an old guy. I chuckled. I may be old, Timothy, but I'm not dead. I read, I learn, I adapt. Margaret's biggest mistake was assuming that a 73-year-old farmer couldn't possibly understand modern technology or legal strategy. My daughter-in-law Sarah spoke up, but wasn't it risky? What if the federal investigators hadn't been interested? What if Pike and Carson's corruption hadn't been discovered? Then I would have found another way, I said simply. Because the truth was on my side. My deed was legitimate, my land ownership was legal, and Margaret's documents were fraudulent. The corruption just made it easier to prove. But even without it, I had enough evidence to expose her fraud. We sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the valley turn purple in the fading light. I learned something through all this, I finally said. Revenge isn't about hurting someone. It's about justice. Margaret didn't just try to steal my land, she tried to steal my legacy, my family's history, my dignity. She tried to use the law itself as a weapon against an innocent person. That kind of evil deserves consequences. So what happens now? Marcus asked. Now. I go back to farming. I tend my land, enjoy my grandchildren, and live out my days in peace. I smiled. Though I did make one change. What's that? See that 5-acre section Margaret wanted so badly? The one with the spring. I pointed to the eastern edge of my property. I've decided to donate it to the county for a public park. Free access to the spring for everyone in perpetuity. It'll be called the Martha Thorne Memorial Park, after my late wife. Jennifer's eyes filled with tears. Dad, that's beautiful. Mom would have loved that. It seems appropriate, I said. Margaret wanted to take that water source and control it, profit from it, keep it for herself. Now it'll belong to everyone. No one will ever be able to claim it, buy it, or steal it. It'll just be there, giving life to whoever needs it. That's better than revenge, Sarah said softly. That's redemption. 2 years have passed since that September morning when police cars rolled up my driveway. Margaret Ashford is serving a 7-year sentence in federal prison. Thomas Reeves lost his law license but avoided jail time, he now sells insurance and keeps his head down. Sheriff Pike and District Attorney Carson are both serving time as well, their careers and reputations destroyed. The Martha Thorne Memorial Park opened last spring. It's become a gathering place for the community, families picnicking, children playing in the creek fed by the spring, couples walking the nature trails my grandson Timothy helped design. There's a plaque at the entrance with my wife's name and a quote she used to say, "The earth provides for all, not just the greedy." I still live on my land, all 50 acres of it, legally and indisputably mine. The orchard still produces apples every fall. The garden still feeds my family. The land my grandfather chose, that my father tended, that I've spent my life caring for, it remains in the family, and it will pass to my children and their children after them. But the real story, the one I tell my grandchildren when they visit, isn't about the land at all. It's about principle. It's about standing up for what's right even when the system seems stacked against you. It's about using your mind, your patience, and your integrity as weapons far more powerful than any bribe or corrupt official. Last week, I received a letter. It was from Margaret, forwarded through the prison system. I almost didn't open it, but curiosity won out. It was an apology. Sort of. She wrote about how prison had given her time to think, to reflect on her actions. She claimed she'd been consumed by greed, that she'd let her desire for wealth and control override her judgment. She said she understood now that what she tried to do was wrong, that she deserved everything that happened to her. Mr. Thorne, I've spent 2 years asking myself why you didn't just take my offer, why you couldn't just sell me those 5 acres and avoid all this trouble. I finally understand. It was never about the land. It was about refusing to let someone take what wasn't theirs to take. You taught me a lesson I should have learned decades ago: some things aren't for sale, and some people can't be bought. I hope you find it in your heart to forgive me someday, though I know I don't deserve it. I sat on my porch, the same porch where this story began, and read that letter 3 times. Then I took out a piece of paper and wrote back. Margaret, forgiveness isn't mine to grant or withhold. You wronged the system, the community, and yourself as much as you wronged me. But I will say this: I hope you use your remaining years to be better than you were. I hope you find peace and purpose in making amends. And I hope you learn what I've known all my life, that true wealth isn't measured in acres or dollars, but in integrity, family, and the ability to sleep soundly knowing you've lived an honest life. Respectfully, Samuel Thorne. I never mailed it. I kept it in my desk drawer, unsure if sending it would help or hurt. Maybe someday I'll decide. My grandson Timothy is graduating next month with his computer science degree. He's already been accepted to a graduate program, but he tells me he wants to take a year off first, to help me modernize the farm operations, to set up better water management systems for the park. I want to learn from you, Grandpa, he said last time he visited. Not just about farming, but about standing up for what's right. About being patient and smart instead of angry and reckless. That's when I knew the real victory wasn't defeating Margaret Ashford. It wasn't keeping my land or exposing corruption. The real victory was passing down something more valuable than property: the knowledge that justice, pursued with wisdom and patience, will always triumph over greed. As I sit here now, rocking gently in the chair my grandfather built, watching another sunset paint the valley in shades of gold and amber, I think about the nature of revenge. The world would have you believe that revenge is about destruction, about making your enemy suffer as you have suffered. But that's not revenge, that's just cruelty answering cruelty, violence answering violence. It solves nothing and leaves everyone diminished. True revenge is about justice. It's about exposing wrongdoing, protecting the innocent, and ensuring that those who abuse power face consequences. It's about being strategic, patient, and thorough. It's about winning not just the battle, but winning it in a way that makes the world slightly better than it was before. Margaret Ashford tried to take my land through lies and corruption. In her greed, she revealed a rot in our local system: corrupt officials, compromised justice, the erosion of the very principles that should protect citizens. By fighting back intelligently, I didn't just save my property, I helped purge that corruption, strengthen the system, and remind people that justice still exists for those willing to fight for it. And that public park, that spring flowing freely for all to enjoy, that's the ultimate revenge. Margaret wanted to control that water, to own it, to profit from it. Now it belongs to everyone and no one, a permanent reminder that some things are beyond the reach of greed. My father used to say, the best fertilizer is the farmer's shadow. He meant that constant attention, daily care, and patient observation make the difference between a thriving field and a barren one. The same is true for justice. You can't just plant truth and walk away expecting it to flourish. You have to tend it, protect it, nurture it through seasons of doubt and storms of opposition. That's what I did. I tended my case like I tended my crops, with attention to detail, patience for the proper season, and confidence that good seeds in good soil will eventually yield a harvest. As the sun finally dips below the hills and the first stars emerge, I raise my coffee cup in a silent toast. To my grandfather, who chose this land. To my father, who taught me its value. To my wife Martha, whose memory inspired the park that will serve generations. To my children and grandchildren, who stood by me when things looked darkest. And yes, even to Margaret Ashford. Because without her greed, I wouldn't have learned just how strong I still am at 73. Without her betrayal, I wouldn't have discovered that wisdom and patience are the greatest weapons an honest person can wield. Without her attempt to destroy me, I wouldn't have had the chance to prove that justice, though sometimes slow, is ultimately unbeatable. Tomorrow I'll wake with the sun, make my coffee, and sit on this porch again. I'll check on the orchard, walk the property line, maybe drive by the park to see families enjoying the spring that was nearly stolen. I'll live my life as I always have, honestly, patiently, with full appreciation for the gifts I've been given and the responsibilities I've accepted. And if someone ever asks me about revenge, about whether it's worth pursuing, I'll tell them this story. I'll tell them that revenge, properly understood, isn't about destruction, it's about restoration. It's about making things right, protecting what matters, and ensuring that justice prevails. The crickets are singing now, their chorus rising in the darkness. Somewhere in the valley, a barn owl calls. The land settles into its nightly rest, secure in the knowledge that it's protected, loved, and honored. This is my revenge, not Margaret Ashford in prison, though she's there. Not the corrupt officials removed from power, though they are. Not even keeping my land, though I did. My revenge is this moment, this peace, this absolute certainty that I fought the right fight in the right way and won not just for myself, but for everyone who believes that truth and justice still matter in this world. And that, my friends, is a victory worth fighting for.